So, the Nye guy is probably aware of this, but a lot of people out there might not be. So, for their education, I thought I would let you know that there is an old Christmas tradition in the British Isles. Oh, you love Christmas, Aki, isn't he cute with his little Santa hat on? And that tradition is you must have a ghost story at Christmas. And to that end, I have acquired this little book here, The Ghost Stories of M.R. James, which is full of a selection of Mr. James's finest short stories. Uh, Montague Rhodes James was a provost at King's College. He studied at Eton. He was an antiquarian, and he liked to write ghost stories. And it started off as a tradition that every Christmas Eve he would have a few friends and he would read them a ghost story, and the tradition grew and grew and grew to the point where he would do readings in front of groups of students and that sort of thing. Um, I first encountered these in a series called A Ghost Story at Christmas with Christopher Lee. And I think that's a fantastic series to have a look at on YouTube if you've got a bit of time. Nye Guy, would you do me the honors of changing the stream category to just chatting and perhaps change the stream title to A Ghost Story for Christmas? I've got myself a nice glass of Drambuie here, and I'm literally going to sit down and read you all the story. And I think the best possible story I could select, my personal favorite, expecting Pat to come back dressed as Santa. I perhaps one day, but no, not this time. Um, no, our Christmases are a tad darker, I'm afraid. Sorry, could you repeat that? My Wi-Fi shit itself. Oh, I was wondering if you could change the stream title to A Ghost Story for Christmas and change the stream category to just chatting. But from the works of M.R. James, there's a little tale that I've grown quite fond of. It's called simply The Ash Tree. Everyone who has traveled... good, great start. Take it again. There's one particular story from Mr. M.R. James. Mr. M.R. James? From Mr. James? From James. The Ash Tree. Everyone who has traveled over eastern England knows the smaller country houses with which it is studded. The rather dank little buildings, usually in the Italian style, surrounded with parks of some 80 to 100 acres. For me, they have always had a very strong attraction, with the grey paling of split oak, the noble trees, the meres and their reed beds, and the line of distant woods. Then I liked the pillared portico, perhaps stuck on to a red brick Queen Anne house, which has been faced with stucco to bring it into line with the Grecian tastes of the end of the 18th century. The hall inside, going up to the roof, which hall ought always to be provided with a gallery and a small organ. I like the library, too, where you may find anything from a Psalter of 13th century to a Shakespeare quarto. I like the pictures, of course, and perhaps most of all, I like fancying what life in such a house was when it was first built, and in the piping times of landlord's prosperity, and not least now, when, if money is not so plentiful, taste is more varied, and life quite as interesting. I wish to have one of these houses, and enough money to keep it together, and entertain my friends in it modestly. The ass tree? How dare you? Sounds like a cracking tree. It's the best kind. If it ain't ash, it's trash. You know what they say. But this is a digression. But this is a digression. I have to tell you of a curious series of events which happened in such a house as I have tried to describe. It is Castringham Hall in Suffolk. I think a good deal has been done to the building since the period of my story, but the essential features I have sketched are page is really that thick. Oh my god. That's a thick page. I thought it was two together. No, man, that's solid. But the essential features I have sketched are still there. Italian portico, square block of white house, older inside than out, park with fringe of woods and mere. The one feature that marked out this house from a score of others is gone. As you looked at it from the park, you saw on the right a great old ash tree growing within a half a dozen yards of the wall, and almost or quite touching the building with its branches. I suppose it had stood there ever since Castringham ceased to be a fortified place, and since the moat was filled in with the Elizabethan dwelling house built. Filled in and the Elizabethan dwelling house built. At any rate, it had well nigh attained its full dimensions in the year 1690. In that year, the district in which the hall is situated was the scene of a number of witch trials. It will be long, I think, before we arrive at a just estimate of the amount of solid reason, if there was any, which lay at the root of the universal fear of witches in old times. Whether the persons accused of this offense really did imagine that they were possessed of unusual power of any kind, or whether they had the will, at least, if not the power, of doing mischief to their neighbors, or whether all the confessions, of which there were so many, were extorted by the mere cruelty of the witch-finders. These are questions which are not, I fancy, yet resolved. And the present narrative gives me pause. I cannot altogether sweep it away as mere invention. The reader must judge for himself. Had to restart your PC? Well, I'm terribly sorry. But you haven't missed much, thankfully. Mr. James, M.R. James has a lovely meandering style that feels like an actual person is sitting down and telling you a tale from their memory. I really, really like the way that it sort of meanders about. Castringham contributed a victim to the auto da fe. Mrs. Mothersole was her name, and she differed from the ordinary run-of-village witches only in being rather better off and in a more influential position. Efforts were made to save her by several reputable farmers of the parish. They did their best to testify to her character and showed considerable anxiety as to the verdict of the jury. But what seems to have been fatal to the woman was the evidence of the then proprietor of Castringham Hall, Sir Matthew Fell. He deposed to having watched her on 3 different occasions from his window at the full of the moon, gathering branches from the ash tree near my house. In quotes. She had climbed into the branches, clad only in her shift, and was cutting off small twigs with a peculiarly curved knife, and as she did so, she seemed to be talking to herself. On each occasion, Sir Matthew had done his best to capture the woman, but she had always taken alarm at some accidental noise he had made, and all he could see when he got down to the garden was a hare running across the path in the direction of the village, a hare being a rabbit. In her shift, in her dressing gown, in a nightgown. Yes, thank you, Nye Guy. In her shift. I may need to provide some slight translation for some of the old terminology in this, of which I've done a bit of study, so perhaps I am quite the man that you are meant to be hearing this story from. But if you have further questions and aren't just being a sarcastic ass, just let me know. I can never quite tell with you, Indigo, whether you're being playful or whether you're genuinely like, wait, did you just say in her shit? But anyway, on the 3rd night, he had been at the pains to follow at his best speed and had gone straight to Mrs. Mothersole's house. But he had had to wait a quarter of an hour, battering at her door, and then she had come out very cross and apparently very sleepy, as if just out of bed, and he had no good explanation to offer for his visit. Mainly on this evidence, though, there was much more of a less striking and unusual kind from other parishioners. Mrs. Mothersole was found guilty and condemned to die. She was hanged a week after the trial, with 5 or 6 more unhappy creatures, at Bury St. Edmunds. Sir Matthew Fell, then deputy sheriff, was present at the execution. It was a damp, drizzly March morning when the cart made its way up the rough grass hill outside Northgate, where the gallows stood. The other victims were apathetic or broken down with misery, but Mrs. Mothersole was, as in life, so in death, of a very different temper. Her, quote, poisonous rage, as a reporter of the time puts it, did so work upon the bystanders, yea, even upon the hangman, that it was constantly affirmed of all that saw her that she presented the living aspect of a mad devil. Yet she offered no resistance to the officers of the law, only she looked upon those that laid hands upon her with so direful and venomous an aspect that, as of them afterwards assured me, the mere thought of it preyed inwardly upon his mind for 6 months after. However, all that she is reported to have said was the seemingly meaningless words, "There will be guests at the hall," which she repeated more than once in an undertone. And why wouldn't she be angry? Yeah, I suppose. Also a great read. Oh, well, thank you. I'm trying to put as much. I'm. 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 What's the word I'm looking for? I'm channeling Christopher Lee here. His reading of it is really quite good, and honestly, so is Robert Powell. There's a set of these by Robert Powell from like the 1970s or something, and they're wonderful. I literally kept them on my phone. I fell asleep to them sometimes. I'm a huge fan. So a wee dram of the boo, but a drambuie to fortify us for the terrifying events that should come to pass. Um, Sir Matthew Fell was not unimpressed by the bearing of the woman. He had some talk upon the matter with the vicar of his parish, with whom he travelled home after the assize business was over. His evidence at the trial had not been very willingly given. He was not specially infected with the witch-finding mania, but he declared then and afterwards that he could not give any other account of the matter than that which he had given, and that he could not possibly have been mistaken as to what he saw. The whole transaction had been repugnant to him, for he was a man who liked to be on pleasant terms with those about him, but he saw a duty to be done in his business, and he had done it. That seems to have been the gist of his sentiments, and the vicar applauded it, as any reasonable man must have done. A few weeks after, when the moon of May was at the full, vicar and squire met again in the park, and walked to the hall together. Lady Fell was with her mother, who was dangerously ill, and Sir Matthew was alone at home, so the vicar, Mr. Crome, was easily persuaded to take a late supper at the hall. So Sir Matthew was not very good company this evening. The talk ran chiefly on family and parish matters, and as luck would have it, Sir Matthew made a memorandum in writing of certain wishes or intentions of his regarding his estates, which afterwards proved exceedingly useful. Supper is a wonderful term. And go, I could just see you just biting your teeth at the whole concept of a witch trial. I completely understand. Oh, how dare you be a woman and not married and treated like property? It must have been an awful time. So I sympathize. Hmm. When Mr. Crome thought of starting for home about 9:30, Sir Matthew and he took a preliminary turn of the gravelled walk at the back of the house. The only incident that struck Mr. Crome was this. They were in sight of the ash tree, which I described as growing near the windows of the building, when Sir Matthew stopped and said, "What is that runs up and down the stem of the ash? It is never a squirrel. They will all be in their nests by now." The vicar looked and saw the moving creature, but he could make nothing of its color in the moonlight. The sharp outline, however, seen for an instant, was imprinted on his brain, and he could have sworn, he said, though it sounded foolish, that, squirrel or not, it had more than 4 legs. Still, not much was to be made of the momentary vision, and the two men parted. They may have met since then, but it was not for a score of years. Next day, Sir Matthew Fell was not downstairs at 6 in the morning, as was his custom, nor at 7, nor yet at 8. Hereupon the servants went and knocked at his chamber door. I need not prolong the description of their anxious listenings and renewed batterings on the panels. The door was opened at last from the outside, and they found their master dead and black. So much you have guessed that there were any marks of violence did not at the moment appear, but the window was open. One of the men went to fetch the parson, and then, by his directions, rode on to give notice to the coroner. Mr. Crome himself went as quick as he might to the hall, and was shown to the room where the dead man lay. He has left some notes among his papers which show how genuine a respect and sorrow was felt for Sir Matthew, and there is also this passage, which I transcribe for the sake of the light it throws upon the course of events, and also upon the common beliefs of the time. Quote, "There was not any the least trace of entrance having been forced to the chamber, but the casement stood open, as my poor friend would always have it in this season. He had his evening drink of small ale in a silver vessel of about a pint measure, and tonight had not drunk it out. The drink was examined by the physician from Bury, Mr. Hodgkins, who could not, however, as he afterwards declared upon his oath, before the coroner's quest, discover that any manner of venomous kind was present in it. For, as was natural, in the great swelling and blackness of the corpse, there was talk made among the neighbors of poison. The body was very much disordered, as it laid in the bed, being twisted after so extreme a sort as it gave too probable conjecture that my worthy friend and patron had expired in great pain and agony. And what is as yet unexplained, and to myself the argument of some horrid and artful design in the perpetrators of this barbarous murder, was this, that the women which were entrusted with the laying out of the corpse and washing it, being both solid parsons and very well respected in their mournful profession, came to me with a great pain and distress, both of mind and body, saying, what was indeed confirmed upon the first view, that they had no sooner touched the breast of the corpse with their naked hands than they were sensible of a more than ordinary violent smart and aching in their palms, which, with their whole forearms, in no long time swelled so immoderately, the pain still continuing, that, as afterwards proved, during many weeks they were forced to lay by the exercise of their calling, and yet no mark seen on the skin. I love this description. The idea that these two ladies who were asked, that these two ladies were their job was to handle the corpse and bring it to the coroner's place and to properly dress it and set it up for burial and everything. Just by touching it, their arms swelled up and caused them immense pain. That's such a fantastic description. Upon hearing this, I sent for the physician, who was still in the house, and we made as careful a proof as we were able, by the help of a small magnifying lens of crystal, of the condition of the skin and this part of the body, but could not detect with the instrument we had any matter of importance beyond a couple of small punctures or pricks, which was then concluded were spots by which the poison might be introduced, remembering that ring of Pope Borgia with other known specimens of the horrid art of the Italian poisoners of the last age. So much is to be said of the symptoms seen of the corpse. As to what I am to add, it is merely my own experiment, and to be left to posterity to judge whether there be anything of value therein. There was on the table by the bedside a Bible, of the small size, in which my friend, punctual as in matters of less moment, so in those more weighty one, used nightly, and upon his first rising, to read a set portion. And I, taking it up, not without a tear, duly paid to him, which from the study of this poorer adumbration, that's a fun word, adumbration, was now passed to the contemplation of its great original. It came into my thoughts, as at such moments of helplessness we are prone to catch at the least glimmer that makes promise of light, to make trial of that old and by many accounted superstitious practice of drawing the sortes, of which a principal instance, in the case of his late sacred majesty, the blessed martyr King Charles, and my Lord Falkland, was now much talked of. I must needs admit that my trial not much assistance was afforded me. Yet, as the cause of the origin of these dreadful events may hereafter be searched out, I set down the results, in the case it may be found that they pointed to the true quarter of the mischief to a quicker intelligence than my own. I made then 3 trials, opening the book and placing my finger upon certain words, which gave in the first, and this is fun, It's fascinating how language has changed over time. I understand this perfectly, but my brain is still translating it for me. Essentially, what he's saying is, I found a Bible that my friend kept at his bedside, and before bed each night, he would read a portion, and when he rose each morning, he would read a portion. This was his Bible. This was important to him. It was personal. And so I took practice of drawing the sortes, which is an old practice which some people may know as bibliomancy. And his idea was to open the book to a random place and place his finger upon a piece of text, and then read that text, that it might give insight into what had happened to the man to whom it had belonged. This is magic, and yet these are good Christian folk. I think that's very interesting, and the fact that we have bibliomancy, specifically drawing the sortes from the Bible, is a very fun, what's the word that you use, Indigo? Syncretism of the two types of faith that were native to this region. We had pagans in the British Isles, but we also had Christians, and they did not convert immediately. There was a slow change from one to the other, and so some of those practices really did stick around. And like you said, there's a lot of Christian mysticism, and I think that's because Christianity converted so many different types of people and picked up little things from each of those people's practices. I made then 3 trials, opening the book and placing my finger upon certain words, which gave in the first these words, from Luke 13:7, cut it down. In the second, Isaiah 13:20, it shall never be inhabited. And upon the third experiment, Job 39:30, her young ones also suck up blood. This is all that need be quoted from Mr. Crome's papers. Sir Matthew Fell was duly coffined and laid into the earth, and his funeral sermon, preached by Mr. Crome on the following Sunday, has been printed under the title of The Unsearchable Way, or England's Danger and the Malicious Dealings of the Antichrist. It being the vicar's view, as well as that most commonly held in the neighborhood, that the squire was the victim of a recrudescence of the popish plot. His son, Sir Matthew II, succeeded to the title and the estates, and so ends the first act of the Castringham tragedy. It is to be mentioned, though, that the fact is not surprising, that the new baronet did not occupy the room in which his father had died, nor indeed was it slept in by anyone but an occasional visitor during the whole of its occupation. He died in 1735, and I do not find that anything particular marked his reign, save a curiously constant mortality among his cattle and livestock in general, which showed a tendency to increase slightly as time went on. Those who are interested in the details will find a statistical account in a letter of the Gentleman's Magazine of 1772, which draws the facts from the baronet's own papers. He put an end to it at last by a very simple expedient, that of shutting up his beasts in sheds at night and keeping no sheep in his park, for he had noticed that nothing was ever attacked that spent the night indoors. After that, the disorder confined itself to wild birds and beasts of chase. But as we have no good account of the symptoms, and as all night watching was quite unproductive of any clue, I do not dwell on what the Suffolk farmers called the Castringham sickness. Oh, if my dad died and was bloated and blackened, a corpse in the bed, you couldn't convince me to sleep in the same house, let alone the same room. Madness. The second Sir Matthew died in 1735, as I said, and was duly succeeded by his son, Sir Richard. It was in his time that the great family pew was built out on the north side of the parish church. So large were the squire's ideas that several of the graves on the hallowed side of the building had to be disturbed to satisfy his requirements. Among them was that of Mrs. Mothersole, the position of which was accurately known thanks to a note on a plan of the churchyard, both made by Mr. Crome. A certain amount of interest was excited in the village when it was known that the famous witch, who was still remembered by a few, was to be exhumed, and that feeling of surprise and indeed disquiet was very strong when it was found that, though her coffin was fairly sound and unbroken, there was no trace whatever inside it of a body, bones, or dust. Indeed, it is a curious phenomenon, for at the time of her burying, no such things were dreamt of as resurrection men. Those are people who used to pick bodies out to sell to medical students and artists because it wasn't legal for you to have those things at the time, and yet you needed them to study your trade. Resurrection men, they called them. Body snatchers, yes. Um, and it's difficult to conceive any rational motive for stealing a body otherwise than for the uses of the dissecting room. The incident revived for a time all the stories of witch trials and of the exploits of the witches dormant for 40 years. And Sir Richard's orders that the coffin should be burnt were thought by a good many to be rather foolhardy, though they were duly carried out. Yes, her body being missing would be most troubling to the locals, I would imagine. Sir Richard was a pestilent innovator, it is certain. Before his time, the hall had been a fine block of the mellowest red brick, but Sir Richard had travelled in Italy and become infected with the Italian taste, and having more money than his predecessors, he determined to leave an Italian palace where he had found an English house. So stucco and ashlar masked the brick. Some indifferent Roman marbles were planted about the entrance hall and gardens. A reproduction of Sibyl's temple at Tivoli was erected on the opposite bank of the mere. And Castringham took an entirely new and, I must say, a less engaging aspect. But it was much admired and served as a model to a good many of the neighboring gentry in after years. One morning, it was in 1754, Sir Richard woke after a night of discomfort. It had been windy, and his chimney had smoked persistently, and yet it was so cold that he must keep a fire. Also, something had so rattled about the window that no man could get a moment's peace. Further, there was the prospect of several guests of position arriving in the course of the day, who would expect sport of some kind, and the inroads of the distemper, which continued among his game, had been lately so serious that he was afraid for his reputation as a game preserver. But what really touched him was the other matter of his sleepless night. He could certainly not sleep in that room again. What's up, man? What you reading? I am reading The Ash Tree by M.R. James. I just thought it would be a fun way to close out the stream, to do a Christmas ghost story. We did a nutmeg? No, we did an eggnog taste test earlier. 6 different eggnogs, compared and contrasted, and we've been playing an old game that it's not a Christmas game because Christmas games suck, but I'm playing an old game, and it's just sort of nostalgic for me. It's a game I played a lot as a kid, so you know, feeling cheerful, having a glass of drambuie, and reading a Christmas ghost story, as the old tradition dictates. Just thought it would be a bit of fun, and I'm glad that you came in for the end of it. Let's see here. That was the chief subject of his meditations at breakfast, and after it he began a systematic examination of the rooms to see which would suit his notions best. It was long before he found one. This had a window with an eastern aspect, and that with a northern. This door the servants would be always passing, and he did not like the bedstead in that. No, he must have a room with a western lookout, so that the sun could not wake him early, and it must be out of the way of the business of the house. The housekeeper was on the end of her resources. "Well, Sir Richard," she said, "you know that there is but one room like that in the house." "Which may that be?" said Sir Richard. "And that is Sir Matthew's, the west chamber." "Well, put me in there, for there I'll lie tonight," said her master. "Which way is it? Here, to be sure," and he hurried himself off. "Oh, Sir Richard, but no one has slept there these 40 years. The air has hardly changed since Sir Matthew died there." Thus she spoke, and rustled after him. "Come, open the door, Mrs. Chiddock. I'll see the chamber at least." So it was opened, and indeed the smell was very close and earthy. Sir Richard crossed to the window, and impatiently, as was his wont, threw the shutters back, and flung open the casement. For this end of the house was one which the alterations had barely touched, grown up as it was with the great ash tree, and being otherwise concealed from view. Air it, Mrs. Chittock, all today, and move my bed furniture in the afternoon. Put the Bishop of Kilmore in my old room. Pray, sir, said a new voice. Oh, sorry, there's a different character. Pray, sir, said a new voice, breaking in on his speech, might I have the favor of a moment's interview? Sir Richard turned round and saw a man in black in the doorway, who bowed. I must ask your indulgence for this intrusion, Sir Richard. You will perhaps hardly remember me. My name is William Crome. My grandfather was vicar here in your grandfather's time. Well, sir, said Sir Richard, the name of Crome is always a passport to Castringham. I am glad to renew a friendship of 2 generations standing. And what can I serve you? For your hour of calling, and if I do not mistake you, your bearing, shows you to be in some haste. That is more than the truth, sir. I am riding from Norwich to Bury St. Edmunds with what haste I can make, and I have called in on my way to leave you some papers which we have just come upon in looking over my grandfather left at his death. It is thought you may find some matters of family interest in them. You are mighty obliging, Mr. Crome, and if you will be so good as to follow me to the parlor and drink a glass of wine, we will take a first look at these same papers together. And you, Mrs. Chittock, as I said, be about airing this chamber. Yes, it is here my grandfather died. Yes, the tree perhaps does make the place a little dampish. No, I do not wish to listen to any more. Make no difficulties, I beg. You have your orders. Go. Will you follow me, sir? They went to the study. The packet which young Mr. Crome had brought, he was then just become a fellow of Clare Hall in Cambridge, I may say, and subsequently brought out a respectable edition of Pollianus, contained, among other things, the notes which the old vicar had made upon the occasion of Sir Matthew Fell's death. And for the first time, Sir Richard was confronted with the enigmatical sortes biblicae, which you have heard. They amused him a good deal. The parlor is where all the fun happens. Oh, yes. Fireplace, a good glass of claret, rich tobaccos to be smoked. Certainly. Well, he said, my grandfather's Bible gave one prudent piece of advice. Cut it down. If that stands for the ash tree, he may rest assured I shall not neglect it. Such a nest of catarrhs and agues was never seen. I had to look up catarrhs and agues because I didn't know what the fuck it was. But basically, it's just like little gross, knobbly bits, and it implies that somebody's diseased. If you have catarrhs and agues on your skin, you're pocked. You're gross. And so he's just saying the trees, that old ash tree's looking pretty fucking nasty. The parlor contained the family books, which, pending the arrival of a collection which Sir Richard had made in Italy, and the building of a proper room to receive them, were not many in number. Sir Richard looked up from the paper to the bookcase. I wonder, says he, whether the old prophet is there yet. I fancy I see him. Crossing the room, he took out a dumpy Bible, which sure enough bore on the flyleaf the inscription, To Matthew Fell, from his loving godmother, Anne Aldous, 2nd September, 1659. It would be no bad plan to test him again, Mr. Crome. I will wager we get a couple of names in the chronicles. What have we here? Thou shalt seek me in the morning, and I shall not be. Well, well, your grandfather would have made a fine omen of that, eh? No more profits for me. You're all in a tale. And now, Mr. Crome, I am infinitely obliged to you for your packet. You will, I fear, be impatient to get on. Pray, allow me. Another glass? A dumpy Bible. It was just a little dumpy thing. It certainly wasn't fancy. It was very humble. So, with offers of hospitality, which were genuinely meant, for Sir Richard thought well of the young man's address and manner, they parted. In the afternoon came the guests, the Bishop of Kilmore, Lady Mary Hervey, Sir William Kentfield, etc. Dinner at 5, wine, cards, supper, and dispersal to bed. Goes perfectly with the ash tree. This Bible's got a real nice dumpy. Oh, God, I hate that. Next morning, Sir Richard is disinclined to take his gun to with the rest. He talks with the Bishop of Kilmore. This prelate, unlike a good many of the Irish bishops of his day, had visited his see and indeed resided there for some considerable time. This morning, as the two were walking along the terrace and talking over the alterations and improvements in the house, the bishop said, pointing to the window of the west room, You could never get one of my Irish flock to occupy that room, Sir Richard. Why is that, my lord? It is in fact my room. Well, our Irish peasantry will always have it there that it brings the worst of luck to sleep near an ash tree. You have a fine growth of ash not 2 yards from your chamber window. Perhaps the bishop went on. Perhaps, the bishop went on with a smile, it has given you a touch of its quality already. You do not seem, if I may say so, much the fresher for your night's rest, as your friends would like to see you. I, I'm I'm having a hell of a time with that character, the way he talks. We'll try that again, and I'll try to get, because he says he's from Ireland. He traveled to Ireland, but he's not Irish himself. So I'm in a little bit of trouble figuring out what this guy's accent should be. Uh, well, our Irish peasantry will always have it that it brings the worst of luck to sleep near an ash tree, and you have a fine growth of ash not 2 yards from your chamber window. Perhaps the bishop went on with a smile. It has given you a touch of its quality already, for you do not seem, if I may say it, so much the fresher for your night's rest, as your friends would like to see you. That or something else, it is true, cost me my sleep from 12 to 4, my lord. But the tree is to come down tomorrow, so I shall not hear much more from it. Texan? I don't fucking know. He went. Most stately gentleman. I don't know what I was doing there. He's a bit mad. What can I tell you? I applaud your determination. It can hardly be wholesome to have the air you breathe strained, as it were, through all that leafage. Your lordship is right there, I think, but I had not my window open last night. It was rather the noise that went on, no doubt from the twigs sweeping the glass, that kept me open-eyed. I think that can hardly be, Sir Richard. Here, you see it from this point. None of these nearest branches even can touch your casement, unless there were a gale, and there was none of that last night. They missed the panes by a foot. No, sir. What then will it be, I wonder, that scratched and rustled so, and covered the dust on my sill with lines and marks? At last they agreed that the rats must have come up through the ivy. That was the bishop's idea, and Sir Richard jumped at it. I heard a Brennan Gleeson twinge there. Very nice. I think it was a bit shit, to be honest with you. I'm sorry. Wasn't really sure what I was doing there. I was like Brendan Gleeson when he's pretending to be English in 28 Days Later. Like that was fucked. I was going for the guy who comes in to Blackadder just before he's about to be executed in Blackadder Goes Forth and tells him he's got some gentlemen to see him, and it's just his firing squad who wants to say hi. But he's got a very odd accent, and I don't know where he's from. So that's the guy I was going for. Um, So the day passed quietly, and night came, and the party dispersed to their rooms and wished Sir Richard a better night. And now we are in his bedroom, with the light out and the squire in bed. The room is over the kitchen, and the night outside still and warm, so the window stands open. There is very little light about the bedstead, but there is a strange movement there. It seems as if Sir Richard were moving his head rapidly to and fro, with only the slightest possible sound. And now you would guess, so deceptive is the half-darkness, that he had several heads, round and brownish, which move back and forward, even as low as his chest. It is a horrible illusion. Is it nothing more? There, something drops off the bed with a soft plump like a kitten, and is out of the window in a flash. Another. 4. And after that, there is quiet again. Thou shalt seek me in the morning, and I shall not be. As with Sir Matthew, so with Sir Richard, dead and black in his bed. A pale and silent party of guests and servants gathered under the window when the news was known, Italian poisoners, popish emissaries, infected air, all these and more guesses were hazarded, and the Bishop of Kilmore looked at the tree, in the fork of whose lower boughs a white tomcat was crouching, looking down the hollow, which years had gnawed in the trunk. It was watching something inside the tree with great interest. Suddenly it got up and craned over the hole. Then a bit of the edge on which it stood gave way, and it went slithering in. Everyone looked up at the noise of the fall. It is known to most of us that a cat can cry, but few of us have heard, I hope, such a yell as came out of the trunk of the great ash. 2 or 3 screams there were, the witnesses are not sure which, and then a slight and muffled noise of some commotion or struggling was all that came. But Lady Mary Hervey fainted outright, and the housekeeper stopped her ears and fled till she fell on the terrace. The Bishop of Kilmore and Sir William Kentfield stayed, yet even they were daunted, though it was only at the cry of a cat, and Sir William swallowed once or twice before he could say, "There is something more than we know of in that tree, my lord. I am for an instant search." And this was agreed upon, and a ladder was brought, and one of the gardeners went up, and, looking down the hollow, could detect nothing but a few dim indications of something moving. They got a lantern, and let it down by a rope. "We must get at the bottom of this, my life upon it, my lord. But the secret of these terrible deaths is in there." Up went the gardener again with the lantern, and let it down the hole cautiously. They saw the yellow light upon his face as he bent over, and saw his face struck with an incredulous terror and loathing before he cried out in a dreadful voice, and fell back from the ladder, where happily he was caught by 2 of the men, letting the lantern fall inside the tree. He was in a dead faint, and it was some time before any word would be got out of him. By then they had something else to look at. The lantern must have broken at the bottom, and the light in it caught upon dry leaves and rubbish that lay there, for in a few minutes a dense smoke began to come up, and then flame, and to be short, the tree was in a blaze. The bystanders made a ring at some yards' distance, and Sir William and the bishop sent men to get what weapons and tools they could, for clearly whatever might be using the tree as its lair would be forced out by the fire. So it was. First at the fork, they saw a round body covered with fire, the size of a man's head, appear very suddenly, then seem to collapse and fall back. This 5 or 6 times. Then a similar ball leapt into the air and fell on the grass, where after a moment it lay still. The bishop went as near as he dared to it, and saw what but the remains of an enormous spider, veinous and seared. And as the fire burned lower down, more terrible bodies like this began to break out from the trunk, and it was seen that these were covered with grayish hair. All that day the ash burned, and until it fell to pieces the men stood about it, and from time to time killed the brutes as they darted out. At last there was a long interval when none appeared, and they cautiously closed in and examined the roots of the tree. They found, says the Bishop of Kilmore, below it a rounded hollow place in the earth, where 2 or 3 bodies of these creatures that had plainly been smothered by smoke, and, what is to me more curious, at the side of this den, against the wall, was crouching the anatomy of a skeleton of a human being, with the skin dried upon the bones, having some remains of black hair, which was pronounced by those that examined it to be undoubtedly the body of a woman, and clearly dead for a period of 50 years. And that, ladies and gentlemen, was The Ash Tree by M.R. James. Montague Rhodes James. Montague Rhodes James. I love that story, and it is not the only banger in this list of hits. I've been wanting to read this to you since Halloween, but then I said to myself, no, it's a Christmas ghost story, and so I'm going to do it at Christmas time. And so I waited until this Sunday when I was doing my nonsensical eggnog tasting to read the whole thing to you.